Lawrence Preo, United States Army, Vietnam. I had the great privilege and honor of meeting Lawrence in Lafayette, Indiana. It was March 28th, 2009, 14 years ago this coming Sunday. Oh, I tell you, he has a very unique perspective of Vietnam. He was in the military police with the 716 Military Battalion. First time he's told his story was with me. I'm always humbled when a veteran tells me that. It's just amazing. But he experienced a lot more than I think he told me. But he was involved in a terrorist attack on December 4th, 1965 in Saigon, where many people were injured and people were killed. And Lawrence was right there. There's a picture in the beginning of this video where I show the pictures of him. And he did amazing things in his military career and after his military career. So I want to honor him today, and I want to thank Colleen Cooey for sponsoring this story. Colleen, I'll look in this camera and say thank you. Thank you for your service to this country and honoring our veterans and helping me to help tell the story of Lawrence Preo. Colleen is a rural mail carrier, and I told her my mother worked in the post office and my father did many years ago. But thank you, Colleen. It means a lot. Okay, folks, Memorial Day is coming up just in a few days. As I record this interview, it's the 24th of May 2023. And I just want to read a couple of comments. I get so many comments from people. And what really touches me is when somebody's life is changed through the stories that they hear on my channel. That really touches my heart. And I thank God for that. You know, I really do. This is a ministry to me. So when people share those comments, it means a lot to me. So let me just take about a minute now. I want to read some of these comments. Larry, I am finally healed from a health issue since last November. When I found your channel and started a correspondence, it saved my sanity. I was either lying in a hospital bed or in the house. I couldn't walk on this infected foot, so I was sedentary. God is so good, and I thank you for your channel and what it's done for me. Larry, as with all your interviews, I can't thank you enough. I drive a truck and cannot wait for new interviews to come out. These veterans mean so much to me. You have no idea how much you have changed my life. The first interview I saw was with Ed Masterson. Since then, I have watched your interviews over and over. I am 74 years young now, a Vietnam vet with the Combat Engineers. I was told I have PTSD. Watching your videos helps me greatly. These videos give me peace. Thank you. There should be a mandatory Larry Capetto History of War class in every high school with nothing but his interviews. Folks, those of you who took the time to care and to write those comments, I'm grateful and truly humbled. Thank you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. Lives that are being changed through these stories, through this station and through my radio station, Voices of History Radio. Woo! Memorial Day is coming up. Let's honor our veterans, and would you just join with me right now in honoring Lawrence Preo? Maybe send a comment and thank him for his service. And like with all of my videos, if you'd like to sponsor one of my stories, there's information in the video description in this video on my website, larrycapetto.com. There's a link that says sponsor a vet. You can do that. Or you can donate to my work through the comment section. You go to the comments of this video and all my videos, you can actually read some information about donating to this work. I don't monetize my videos, no commercials here, folks, and there's so much work that goes on behind the scenes. You watch the end product, but there's a lot of hours, countless hours that go into this, and if the cause is great enough, it's worth the effort, and this is definitely worth the effort. So God bless you. Thank you for watching, sharing this channel. Thank you for listening to this longer introduction. It's been an honor serving my God in my country through the lens of my camera.
68.
And were you drafted or?
No, I was a Purdue graduate. I graduated in 63. Had a job 8 months hence, blah, blah, blah. But in a streak of maturity, quit the job and joined the Army as an enlisted man. And by the way, Larry, in those years as an undergraduate, I had mandatory 2 years of ROTC training. But knowing that I'd never go into the Army, I didn't take the second 2 years to become an officer. So I joined the Army in 63 as a buck-ass private, and and that started the odyssey that ended 65, 66 when I was sent to Vietnam.
So right then, I mean, the country, really, Vietnam was just getting started there. I mean, it's, just tell me about your going overseas and what happened with you, and who you were with, the unit you were with, the division, company, or whatever.
I want to first thank you for giving me this opportunity. I have not done the veteran bit in any kind of public way. And I've repressed, as my wife kicked me in the butt to get me here. You've got to grow up, Larry. You've got to take this next step. I think being a patriot in the mid-'60s as this conflict started was not necessarily very popular. It was terribly unpopular. Went in 65. In those days, I believe there were less than 100,000 troops in country when I was there. There was about 50, 60,000. It was all in my experience, and recognizing that I believe those veterans that I do talk to, each of us had our own war. Even the young men. I was 24 at the time. I was one of the oldest. I was often older than the lieutenants that were in fact leading us to freedom and all that kind of good stuff. But even those ages was not very popular. And I'm going to lose my train of thought here, and I just have.
I was just asking you about going in country the first time and the group you're with, and
less than, as I mentioned, less than 100,000. The reference was Repo Depot. Everyone went to Repo Depot. I traveled to Vietnam in a Continental jet. No, units didn't go there at that time as units, so you were, as you probably well know, we're all independent. Went from Chicago to California, I believe, and then from California in a commercial jet full of, the majority were military, and certainly there were a number of civilians. Landed, joined this tent city. I remember just being terrified with all these people together and everything. I thought I was going into war. I thought this was John Wayne. And yet, had I been mature enough to realize that there did not have a minute of training, of preparation. The gear that I took in my rucksack, or whatever it was called, was long johns, winter gear. All the gear that was issued did not have jungle boots, didn't have fatigues that were conducive to that environment. But of course, I wasn't mature enough to realize all of that. They didn't provide us with language training, with culture training, weapon issues in that kind of humid environment. but hell, you know, I realize all those things now as I'm older and mature, but at the time it was, I remember being terrified and terribly excited at the same time. And I felt guilty about being excited because I had gotten married 6 months before I got shipped over. I was with the military police school in Augusta, Georgia. And before I got married, at that time you were expected to get permission from your commanding officer. And when I approached him, he said, "Larry, you're the only non-commissioned officer," I was a corporal at the time, "with a college degree. You teach everything, or you're a part of the teaching team for everything here at the headquarters company. There's no way you're going to get sent to Vietnam. I urge you to go ahead and get married." And of course, that was the kiss of death. But God bless her. We've been married now, 44 years, something like that. Well, anyways, I stayed in the repo depot for probably a week or 10 days, got sent to the 716th Military Battalion, and spent my 12 months, I think, and 2 days with that outfit. And we did everything from street patrol in Saigon to perimeter of Tan Son Nhut Air Base, provided security on the highways to and from Saigon. That was, in the big picture, what I did for those 12 months there.
So 1 year, you were there, one tour, 1 year.
Yes, sir.
You mentioned something interesting. You said you were a patriot and it wasn't popular. I mean, in the country, and that's a shame. I mean, I was talking with Brad, the gentleman before you, about some things, and we talked about the Vietnam veterans and stuff, and of course this is at the end of the interview about the homecoming that you didn't receive. But I've done a film on Vietnam, by the way.
Have you?
Yes, it's very, very powerful film the VA uses to help guys with post-traumatic stress disorders, because they feel it has therapeutic value to hear these guys open up and talk. Had a guy in here yesterday, his son was sitting over there. After the interview, his son said, "I could never get him to open up." This man sat down and he cried, and I have that happen often. I don't know what it is. I just sit here and I listen, I care, and I have veterans telling me things they've never told their families. But anyways, so being a patriot during this time was not popular. That's an interesting thing that you said.
And I, those years, Lair, tend to mesh and fold into themselves in my memory, particularly as I returned. My defense mechanism coming back to the States was to deflect and ignore and not share that 3 years of my life, not only Vietnam, but certainly my time in the service, because you were a baby killer, you were whatever the buzzwords were of that week or that month in the media, and I returned to a collegiate environment. I came back and worked at universities and went back to school and got a master's and a PhD. And while doing that, so for the first 10 years upon our return, we were always in a university environment. I suspect, because I didn't ever live not in a university environment, I suspect what I've heard and read, that the anti-war movement was stronger within that young community, within the college campuses. So I chose the easy way, at least I thought that was the easiest way, is, shit, I'm just, if we're in a social environment and it comes up, I just work my way out of that circle, and my wife and I just handled that crisis, if it was a crisis. I mean, we pushed it so far back that we didn't think about it as a crisis at the time. My kids were teenagers before they knew their father had served in Nam. And still, your reference to the young man here, I wonder what damage, if it has been damage, that I've done with my children. God, I hope not. About 10 years ago, I took a step where I was asked to address a death and dying class at Purdue by a professor who knew that I was a Vietnam vet, and I agreed to do it. And if this is hard, that was probably my not probably, that clearly was my first attempt to talk about it, and it didn't go real well for me. The professor, of course, I think just loved it because it was so emotional for me, and I didn't have the ability to mask that emotion. So I shared. I didn't intentionally share it. I broke down with that class, and he said that did more for them to understand this aspect of death and dying than all of the academic bullshit that I've given them. So yearly he would invite me, and for a few years after that, yearly I'd politely decline. But I did go back and do it a second time, and my wife told my daughter about it, and my daughter snuck in the back of the class. I didn't know it. So my daughter and I are now very, very close. So, but and I don't. I didn't miss being welcome home then. But the last few years, as I've tried to come out of the closet and confront some of these memories and issues, I'm experiencing things for the first time while I'm 60 years old and so far removed from that experience. And why am I know why. Intellectually, I understand that I repressed all these emotions and now they're coming back. I have the sense that they're not valid now because you've had all this time. They should have dissipated. You should. But I find myself 60. I'm 68 now, but a 61-year-old crybaby. And I've never been like that. You know, I've always. I'm from the streets of Chicago, and then an MP, and then Vietnam, and I played football at Purdue under the old iron-fisted Jack Mullenkoff, and I'm always this little skinny quarterback that everybody kicked the snot out of. So I always thought I was tougher than the next guy. So I always thought that I was doing the right thing by repressing these emotions, and that's what tough guys do. And as I said, now whenever this process has come back, I saw that kid downstairs that you're saying goodbye to, and I flashed on my media-induced perception of his experience. And in just those microseconds, as you've probably heard about, a couple of bad news, and there weren't a whole lot of them. I had to get a grip on my emotions just meeting that young man. I'm just
This is good. I mean, this is good. Let's go to Vietnam, though. What you were there 12 months.
Yeah.
Tell me about some of the things you did, you saw, and just give me the atmosphere of the country then, what was going on.
The politics drove a lot of our behavior, at least the military policemen in the Saigon area. Hard to believe, Larry, but there was a period of time that military policemen, and I can only speak for, again, my experience, went on duty on the streets of Saigon without ammunition. They were not allowed to load their weapons. And I was a sergeant in charge of a section of the city that our platoon squad were patrolling, and these kids were out there without ammunition, locked and loaded in their weapon. Now they were carrying ammunition in their ammo pouches, but they couldn't. And of course, we moved from that to being locked and loaded all the time. Some of the most exciting moments that I remember. And so I guess they must be good. There must be good moments. The MP patrols in the city would be similar to a cop in, I think, any big city, but our jeeps were occupied by one MP, one Korean, one representative from the Crown Colonies, almost always a Australian, and a QC, which would have been the Vietnamese policeman. And each had a prerogative, so to speak, only for those citizens of their country. So unless I was defending my life, in theory, I was not to club a Korean who was about to kick my butt. And every Korean could, without doubt, the toughest human beings I had at 24 that I had ever met. And I thought playing football at Purdue would have taught me what tough was. Nothing like those. And no one seemed to enjoy the fight any more than the Australian MP. Would be the first one out of a Jeep. And that tended to be what we did most of the evenings. Mary Jones's bar on some Tukdo, or I don't remember a whole lot of the names, would be on fighting, or there was suspected VC, and we would be called, and often the damn Jeep didn't even come to a stop before the Australian was running full go into the breach, so to speak. Great bonding amongst and I must say, great bonding only amongst the three. The Vietnamese policemen tended to be excluded in our sense of our fighting, our war there. So a lot of memories there. When I was there, there was a lot of restaurants and hotels blown up. As you've done your documentary, they try to run the truck or the pickup truck or panel truck into the billets and blow it up. When I was there, we had a curfew. The city was on, not the entire time, but when things heated up, the powers that be would put a curfew in the city, and I believe it was no one on the streets from 11, maybe midnight to 5, and in theory it was a free fire zone. In other words, you need not ask, what are you doing out? One was authorized to fire. That seldom happened, Larry, because too often the people that you saw in the shadows were drunk GIs, not being where they should. So seldom did one fire just to fire. But it was an interesting time there. We tended to have most of our road issues between Saigon and Bien Hoa, and as you know, the Americans or the good guys controlled the roads between sunup and sundown, and once it got dark, you dare not be on that same highway. So there were many times we would spend the night in places that one might not normally want to spend it.
Now,
Yeah.
when did you leave there? What was it, 66?
66, yes, sir. Summer of
You're in
66.
Saigon, basically, you said the whole time?
Almost most of the time. Bien Hoa, Saigon, Cholan. And now Cholan, I believe, was simply the Chinese section of Saigon.
Were there combat troops in the area?
Yes.
Were Huey helicopters being used then at that time?
Oh.
They just started their mobile
Yep.
operations?
Yes, there were.
Did you have any interaction, involvement, or knowledge of that going on?
Had training at. They needed more gunners on the choppers, and did some work out of Tansanut with that, but it was very limited. Once they got what the air cav, I believe, the air cav personnel, for whatever reason, were not up to what PO&E or whatever that term was for. They didn't have the right numbers. They recruited some of the MPs in Saigon, or at least from our outfit, and it lasted a couple of weeks, and but then we were replaced by real air cav men, and so. But those individuals certainly were in the area, and it was always unfortunate that those men that were in country and up country would do their R&R in Saigon, and they were the real warriors. I certainly never spent 6 months sleeping on the ground and sleeping in buffalo shit like some of those guys. So, but the unfortunate part would be that they'd come in and they'd almost always get in trouble. They didn't come in and go to the library, and we had to deal with them, or try to deal with them. As that young man said, that he was a Marine, and I was not facetious when I said it would always take 2 or 3. They were just tough guys. Tough guys.
You mentioned the the Viet Cong. Were the NVA in the area? I mean, did you guys have them around to deal with? And I've heard stories about the Viet Cong, and just some amazing stories. But was that in and around? I mean, was there?
I don't think the North Vietnam soldiers were folks that we dealt with, or were in the Saigon around that area. There were often spent maybe half the time billeted in a tent city in Tansanut, and that perimeter was breached quite regularly. And when we had firefights with those guys, I do not believe those were North Vietnamese. Those were almost always seemed like children when we found bodies, and I tend to believe those were Charlie, but not regular troops. Sense was that their forays into Tonsanute at the time was always just to harass, keep you going. One of the and I want to apologize because this compared to the guys that really did have combat on a day-to-day basis. It's in my mind so minor, but while in the tent cities, and there would be a perimeter breach, and we'd have to scramble. We'd be in tents, and even as a guy that'd be in country for 6, 7, 8 months, you were considered a hell of a seasoned troop by that time. There were times when there'd be an alarm and we'd have to scramble. I'm sure it was such pure terror, Larry. I could not roll over off the cot and onto the ground. I could not do that. And even though I'd been, it didn't happen every time, but there'd be times and I was absolutely paralyzed. And my weapon was there, and I just needed to. I knew once I hit the ground, my ass would be out the tent flap, and I'd be, because I was sorry, I'm supposed to take care of these kids. Sometimes I want to believe it was only seconds, but it felt like for hours that I was paralyzed there. And it's kind of like when you're caught between a dream and awake, and you know there's this monster under the bed, and you want to call for your mom, you want to, and then then you'd run out. And I never saw a VC in the flesh. I saw the muzzle blasts, the muzzle flashes, and dark and all that. I would see the bodies. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
the whole Vietnam War, I mean, there's so many questions I can ask you, but, just the mood of the country back home as the war started escalating in the mid to late 60s and the anti-war and all this stuff. And that's part of what I'm trying to capture, too, and just coming back home and I'll jump ahead just for a second. But
Sure.
When you did come back home, was there any type of homecoming, or was it the typical story that I hear that people weren't real receptive to you guys?
Yes, sir. I would echo all of that. Now, part of that echoing that message was the fact that I did not try in any form or fashion to let it be known that I was a returning veteran. Those first few weeks, and I'm a slow learner, but that one was a real quick learning curve. The first few weeks, that perhaps the first month, it hadn't quite dawned on me that I was a bastard, that I was a baby killer, that I was all of the issues that one was perceived to be if one served in Nam, and certainly within a month. But when one came back, one was even my family. I don't believe there was any animosity from my brothers. I have 3 brothers, 2 of which served previous years, not in Nam, but in peacetime. They were in the service. It was just kind of benign neglect, just not guys I knew in high school and college, my sense was, someone's going to hug me and embrace me and give me a noogie and say, way to go, thanks. That just didn't happen. That was a little discomforting. And I think now some of the emotions I am trying to deal with is because I repressed them at the time. But no, people tended to just ignore you. And as you watched, after that first month or so, when I was not identified with as a returning vet, as I would watch, again, I was Southern Illinois, University of Illinois, even spent time 2 years at Kent State, a little bit after the Kent State shooting. I was on the staff there. It just, their sense was that we were everyone there was a John Wayne, and war was John Wayne. Death was, and you fall down, no sense of arms and intestines and no eyes, and what reality was. It was very easy, I think, on the college campus to have a cause, and the cause du jour at the time was get out of Vietnam. When we were there, I believe we were very carefully fed information. Now, certainly, the Army and the government would never suggest that there was censorship, but it was very hard to get a Times or a Newsweek, and there obviously was no computers and Twitter and whatever the hell we're doing now. But we've got U.S. Army Times or overseas military publications. So there was a sense in my communications from my wife and family that, things are not real good here. But over there, I always had the sense that we were in a bit of a bubble. Lair, I was always struck with the men that we served with, the young men we served with, they often referred to themselves as either too dumb or too poor to avoid the draft, because most of them were draftees at that time. And I think with that kind of self-image, and talked about themselves and their colleague, their bunkmates, it wasn't a time where even in the service, patriotism, I'm a proud American to be here, stemming the yellow horde at the borders, the environment. I don't believe we lost anybody in my outfit or the outfit I served with fragging that became popular. If killing a fellow serviceman is popular, Jesus, what am I saying? But when that occurred, I think it occurred in more often, and the media picked up on it in the late 60s, early 70s. But the culture amongst the men you served with was, what are we doing here? And it's not what are we doing here because we understand the politics and we understand world affairs. It was, what are we doing here? How come we're so friggin' stupid that we got caught up in the net and sent here, and all of our friends beat the draft or did not get the short straw and get sent over here. So, as I said, being, I've always thought, I've always believed as a kid and now as an adult that America's the best place in the world to be, and I'm so proud to be an American. And you had to repress that as a civilian in those times, but there was that sense in the service also. I don't think so much in the States. I remember how the men and women that were in service at the time that you pulled the short straw and got sent to Vietnam were very supportive. Were very, Larry, if I could go for you, I would. And I don't remember them ever walking anywhere with that message, but that was a message at the time. But once you got in country, it was, at least in that outfit at that time, and I don't think it could be described as gallows humor, trying to be tough at those times. It just not a very welcoming, gung ho environment, and I sense, Lair, that is not the case with our Iraqi storm and the young men and women that are over there now and that were there the first time. Yeah.
You mentioned America being a great country. One of the questions I asked the veterans, Larry, is, what does freedom mean? So I want to ask you that, having fought for our country and been to Vietnam and many years later now, what does freedom mean to you?
Well, the ability, I guess, to be proud that you recognize the fact that you would make every sacrifice for it to continue. I'd love to be able to identify the characteristics of freedom, but I would sound like a academic civics class of voting, and I think freedom is so much more a sense of for you and your family and your children, the ability to, the opportunity to disagree, and for, God bless them, all those 18-year-old long-haired punks that made fun of me and my colleagues. We were there so that they could do that. I came through the Oakland airport on the way back, and I can't tell you, Larry, how excited I was to land in America, and a woman spit on me. I don't think she. I didn't know it. I didn't know it. And how the hell could it be raining? And I just could not. I could not imagine. But as much as, excuse my language, if I'd have known I'd been at that moment that she had spit on me, I would have wanted to engage her in conversation. I suspect that conversation could have been very inappropriate on my part. But I was a 25-year-old kid that had been married for 6 months and left my wife to let her have the ability to spit on me. I don't know that freedom means you impose your will on others. But when you saw the two presidential candidates this last year, one guy, what a veteran, and another man who'd never served, and they were both because our country was free, we're able to engage in that process, and so I guess that's part of freedom.
What does the American flag mean and represent to you as a veteran?
Oh God, everything. It's a symbol, and I don't know why a symbol can be so important. How I see that flag, and I think of the guys that didn't make it back. I think of the guys that were in my outfit that I was responsible for that didn't make it back. And a guy in my under my responsibility would not make it back, and I'd put that flag over his coffin or whatever the hell we were doing at the time with it. And because everything we did at the time, someone certainly a lot smarter than I recognized the very essence of that flag, and it was a part of everything we did. And although the guys pissed and moaned and complained constantly, there wasn't, of the worst of them, there wasn't one of them that wouldn't have done anything to protect that flag. I mentioned I was executive director of the Purdue Alumni Association for 16 years. By the way, men like Neil Armstrong, first man on the moon, and Gene Cernan, the last man on the moon, are both Purdue grads. And I got to, tough duty, got to work with them and Purdue grads all over the world. That part of being I got to wave the Purdue flag. I'm in a car going to a Purdue Alumni Club meeting in downtown Chicago, and traffic gets stopped on Michigan Avenue because it was a protest of some sort, and this is in the late 90s. And there was, as were cars parked right in front of the Art Institute in Chicago, where, this is burned in my memory. There's a kid, and more than one, but the one kid that I saw, horses got a flag, draped in a flag, and it was some kind of protest about something, and he takes the flag off his shoulder, starts stomping on it. Now, freedom in the flag, because of freedom, he can do that. But because it was an American flag, I got out of the cab, didn't know it at the time, but I got out of the cab, walked over, and might have given the kid a forearm shiver that Butkus would have been proud of, but I picked up the flag and went back into the cab. And I did that, and I've no memory of it other than my wife was really great at telling me how I did. I'm sure I remember it. But I guess that's what the flag means, and it's freedom that the kid could do that. Freedom means you can disagree, and but I'm very careful not to put too many flags out at those typical times of the year. Where I live in West Lafayette, I try to put a couple of flags out. And, a couple of flags to me, my wife says, means 16. So we try to come to so what is the flag? It just, it's the most comforting, picture. It's the most, and it doesn't have to be better than the Muslim flag or the, I don't, I'm just, that's a flag. I'm stumbling
No,
here.
you're fine.
I'm stumbling.
A couple more questions.
Yes, sir.
Have you been to the Vietnam Wall in Washington, D.C.?
Uh,
The wall, have you seen the wall?
yeah, yes. Yes, I have.
Was that an emotional time for you?
Impossible. I think, again, excuse me, getting my shit together has got to include this. And thank you again. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. It's got to be to go back to the wall and actually walk its length and to touch it. I'm seeing it from afar. That tends to be as close as I get. I can walk around the perimeter of it. I do that well. Done that a couple of times, but I want to step down and go over there and touch it and do that stuff. I've got to do that kind of healing, and I'd love before I died to be able to go back to Nam. I've gotten on a couple of mailing lists of vets with a mission. I can't. I'm sure I can't do that, but I think I could go there as a tourist. I don't think I can go and build a church or build those things. But Larry, I really want to go to the wall and do that. I really want to go to the wall and do that. Yeah, it just seems bigger than life. I know it's not much more than 10 or 12 feet. I know it goes over your head at some point as you walk on it, but as I got to it, I don't have vertigo. I don't have, what is it called when you get...
Claustrophobic?
Yeah. I'm not claustrophobic, but a couple of those times, boy, just been...
I have a segment in my Vietnam documentary about the wall, my travels there with some of the Vietnam vets, and I've got a really nice song that I have. But what was my last question? If you do go to the wall, let me know. Maybe I can go with you then.
maybe you'll remember the question.
It's the emotion that comes forth when these vets go back and see it. Plus, they know some of the names on the wall, but
Yeah.
it's just a piece of history, and you know what our. I got a lot of memories. You know, I'm very emotional too. It's like I get moved by the stories that I hear, and it affects me. You know, I mean, I've heard almost 700 stories now in 6 years, and we're working on a film now on the Holocaust.
Oh.
And the survivors of the Holocaust, and the guys that liberated the camps. So I mean, there's a tremendous amount of emotion. Holocaust deniers today, but anyways, I'm not going to get off of that. But I think just I think I've asked you the questions that I've wanted to ask you, and just thank you for your service to our country and what you've done, and all the Vietnam vets, and and it's too bad that you were spit upon. I mean, that is a shame. It's a disgrace, and so I reflect your sentiments about that.
Larry, you saying thank you. If anybody had ever said thank you to me, even up to just these, Larry, as you know, for those that served in Nam, that just was not a part of it. And I think so many of us, you repress it, or you're angry, and when things started, there've been, I don't know, I certainly wouldn't call it a movement in America to thank the Vietnam vet, but there's been a theme, I don't know how far back, and when that kind of started, think of that. I remember thinking, bullshit. Bullshit. What do you?
Almost hypocritical, huh?
Yeah, and yet I wanted to be thanked, and I know it wouldn't mean anything. I mean, it didn't change anything. It would change nothing in my life. Jesus. It wouldn't. When
Well, I remember my question.
while you were out of the room, I mentioned something about my daughter coming to. You did okay. After that, she was the first person that said thank you. I thought, oh, she's 40 with 3 kids, with a master's degree and a bachelor's from Purdue, of course. And when I started to hear that, or get that sense of this theme, that all of a sudden our colleagues, our fellow citizens are acknowledging that, or at least acknowledging us. I don't know, acknowledging what, but acknowledging us and saying thank you. That really brought me back to that, my daughter saying thank you, and I couldn't quite understand at the time why it was so powerful. But then, oh, hey, yeah. And you're, yes, sir, please do. Okay.
So quickly, what should our country remember about Vietnam? That's kind of a loaded question. Just take about 60 seconds and try to answer that. What should we remember about Vietnam?
In my most caustic and sarcastic moment, I'd say that I hope that our country would have learned that in fact maybe we shouldn't think we are the answer to everyone's ills and everyone's problems, and that our young men and our young women can be bartered for their problems. While there, we always felt we were sticking our nose in a civil war, and what the hell were we doing there? So I would hope when men in charge write their memoirs and guys like McNamara apologize, I was wrong, or I knew what we should, I would hope the bastards would understand that those young men and women are the foundation of our country, and they shouldn't be wasted for really unimportant reasons. I would love to be able to suggest to you that there was some good that came out of that. I don't know if any good that came out of that. And if the good is that we've learned not to ever do something like that again. I'm not sure what we're doing right now isn't, in fact, some sort of a copy of that, Larry. I don't know, and I fear that 20 years from now, when we do know about Iraq and why we're there, and I pray it's not another fiasco like Vietnam. I pray. So that's.
What would you say to a Vietnam vet today?
Welcome home, brother. Gosh, would. Yep, I would. I'd be. Not. I would be. I am I am very proud of them. And I bet you they've not heard that. I bet they've not heard that, and I'd like to say it to myself. I'd like to, and that's one of those things like the wall. I've got to say to myself, I'm proud of what I did. Right. If I'd have ever done that in civilian life, I'd be in jail. But you do those things in war, in combat, and under those circumstances. And I'd tell them, don't feel guilty. You did what you had to do at the time. And these bastards that second guess you, not right. It's just not right. But we're gonna.
One more thing.
Yes, sir.
At the end of my interviews, I always ask the veterans to give me a salute to the camera. That's my signature. So when I ask you from where you're seated, can you look into the camera and do that?
I sure can.
Okay, give me half a second.
You bet.
Okay, Larry, look right into the camera. Go ahead.
And give you fingers extended and joined. Thank you again. I really appreciate it.